To new beginnings and a very Merry Christmas. Cheers. I hope you're making the right choice, my dear. I have something important to share with everyone tonight. Oh, dear. Is everything okay? I'm pregnant. You're pregnant? Oh, my goodness. You haven't been honest with me. Mother, I don't know what you mean. I think it's time we talked about this. You already know? What is going on?
My daughter lifted her champagne glass with a smile so bright that everyone at the Christmas table smiled back. Then she said, "I'd like to make a toast to Mom's last holiday in this house." Nervous laughter filled the room. Some thought she meant it was finally time for me to move into a retirement community. But I saw the flicker in Emily's eyes, the same look she'd worn for months whenever she thought I wasn't paying attention. I simply raised my own glass and answered, "That's an interesting toast, sweetheart." You see, Emily believed she was revealing my future. She had no idea I had already uncovered the secret that would change hers. If my story touches you in any way, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe so we can spend more moments together. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child made a toast like that at Christmas dinner? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. 3 years before that Christmas dinner, I buried my husband of 42 years. His name was Michael Reynolds, and until the day cancer stole him from me, I had never imagined spending a single Christmas without hearing his laugh echo through our dining room. Every ornament on our tree carried a memory. Every recipe tucked into my old wooden recipe box held his fingerprints in one way or another. The house wasn't just where I lived, it was the place where our family had become a family. People often assume grief fades neatly with time. It doesn't. It simply learns better manners. Instead of screaming, it whispers. Instead of breaking you apart, it quietly settles beside you while you drink your morning coffee. After Michael passed away, everyone worried about me. My neighbors checked in every few days. Members of our church brought casseroles long after the funeral flowers had wilted. My son-in-law Ryan suddenly became very interested in mowing my lawn. Emily called almost every evening. At first, I believed I was one of the luckiest widows in Virginia. My daughter seemed devoted. She insisted on helping with grocery shopping. She organized my medications into neat little containers. She drove me to doctor's appointments even though I was perfectly capable of driving myself. Whenever I thanked her, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "I just want to make life easier for you, Mom." Who wouldn't want to hear those words, especially from their only child? Looking back now, I realize something important. Control rarely arrives wearing the face of cruelty. It usually arrives smiling. It offers help before it asks for authority. It convinces you that surrendering little pieces of independence is simply common sense. At 67, I was healthy. I walked 3 miles every morning through my neighborhood. I volunteered twice a week at the county legal aid office. I still balanced my own finances without assistance. I climbed ladders to change light bulbs, much to Emily's constant frustration. "Mom," she'd sigh whenever she saw me reaching for a step stool, "you don't have to prove you're 25. "I know," I'd answer with a smile. "I'm proving I'm 67. She'd laugh. Or at least she'd pretend to. There was always something different about those laughs. Too quick. Too practiced. As though she were checking a box instead of sharing a moment. Most people who knew me only as a retiree had no idea what I'd spent my career doing. For 40 years, I worked as an estate attorney. My office handled wills, trusts, probate disputes, guardianships, inheritance lawsuits, and family conflicts that often became uglier than strangers could imagine. I had watched brothers sue sisters over grandfather's watch. Children accused their mothers of incompetence to gain financial control. Widows pressured into signing documents they barely understood. Greed never announced itself loudly. It usually whispered. It waited patiently. Then it justified itself. I had spent decades studying those whispers, not because I enjoyed conflict, because my job required me to recognize lies before they became legal disasters. People often think detecting deception depends on dramatic clues. It doesn't. Real deception lives inside tiny inconsistencies. A smile that arrives half a second too late. A story that changes one insignificant detail. Someone offering answers before you've asked a question. Those details become habits after 40 years. You don't turn them off when you retire. Emily knew my professional background. She'd grown up listening to dinner conversations about difficult probate cases, though Michael and I never discussed confidential details. She once joked, "Mom, I'd never try lying to you. You'd probably notice before I finished the sentence." I laughed. I wish that had remained true. About 6 months after Michael's funeral, Emily began mentioning retirement communities. Not directly, never aggressively. She'd send me magazine articles. "Look how beautiful this place is." Or she'd say, "My friend Karen's mother moved into one of these communities. She absolutely loves it." I would nod politely. "It looks lovely." Then I'd change the subject. A few weeks later, she'd try another approach. "This house must feel awfully empty." "It feels peaceful." "Wouldn't it be nice to have less maintenance?" "I enjoy maintaining it." "You don't get lonely." "Sometimes." That answer always seemed to satisfy her more than it should have. Loneliness was apparently useful evidence for an argument she hadn't fully made yet. Months passed. The suggestions became conversations. The conversations slowly became recommendations. Then recommendations became assumptions. One afternoon, she arrived carrying several colorful brochures. She spread them across my kitchen table before I could even offer coffee. "I narrowed it down for you," she said cheerfully. I stared at the glossy photographs. Swimming pools, gardens, game rooms, fitness centers, luxury apartments. It looked more like a resort than a retirement community. "I didn't ask you to do this." "I know, I just thought it would help." "I'm not planning to move." "You don't have to decide today." "I'm not deciding at all." For a brief moment, something flashed across her face. Not disappointment, not concern, frustration. It disappeared almost instantly beneath another pleasant smile. "Of course, Mom." She stacked the brochures neatly. "No pressure." Then she changed the subject. Most people would have forgotten that conversation. I didn't. Not because it was dramatic, because it was the first time Emily had ever ignored what I actually said. She wasn't listening to my answer. She was waiting for it to change. Over the following year, little comments became strangely frequent. "This neighborhood has gotten expensive." "You know how much this property would sell for. You've got more space than you need." It would simplify everything. Always simplify. Always easier. Always safer. I started asking myself a question I had asked hundreds of clients over the years. Who benefits from this decision? The answer wasn't me. I loved my home. I could afford it comfortably. I maintained it without difficulty. Selling offered me no meaningful advantage, but it would offer someone else quite a few. That realization didn't make me suspicious. Not yet. It simply made me attentive. After 4 decades spent protecting vulnerable clients, attentiveness had become second nature. I wasn't looking for evidence against my daughter. I was simply paying closer attention than she realized. And before long, I would notice something that transformed harmless concern into something far more unsettling. The first missing letter didn't concern me. After all, the Postal Service occasionally misplaced things, and I still received enough junk mail to fill my recycling bin every Tuesday. One missing envelope hardly qualified as a mystery. The second one made me pause. The third made me pay attention. I had always handled my own finances with almost obsessive consistency. Every bank statement, utility bill, insurance notice, and investment report arrived in a small brass mailbox at the end of my driveway. Every afternoon after returning from my walk, I carried the mail into the kitchen, brewed a cup of tea, and sorted everything before dinner. It had been my routine for decades. Routines tell us when something changes. One afternoon, I noticed my monthly brokerage statement hadn't arrived. "That's strange," I murmured. I checked the calendar. It was 3 days later than usual. I wasn't worried about the investments themselves. Most statements were available online, and I reviewed my accounts regularly. Still, paper trails matter, especially to lawyers, especially to former estate lawyers. The next morning, I logged into my investment account. Everything looked normal. Balances hadn't changed. No suspicious withdrawals. No unusual transfers. Then I noticed a small notification. "Paper statement successfully delivered." Delivered. I looked toward my empty kitchen table. No statement. I called customer service. After confirming my identity, the representative politely explained, "According to our records, your statement was mailed 10 days ago. Has my mailing address changed?" "No, ma'am." "Any forwarding request?" "No." I thanked her and ended the call. It wasn't enough to accuse anyone of anything, but it was enough to start asking better questions. A week later, something stranger happened. I arrived at my physician's office for my annual wellness appointment. The receptionist smiled apologetically. "Mrs. Reynolds, I thought you canceled." "I'm sorry. We received a cancellation yesterday afternoon." "I never canceled." She frowned and turned her monitor toward herself. "It says your daughter called." "My daughter. She said you weren't feeling well and wanted to reschedule after the holidays." I felt a brief chill despite the warmth of the waiting room. Emily had never mentioned calling, nor had she asked whether I wanted to cancel. I'd still like to keep my appointment. "Of course." The receptionist squeezed me in after a short wait. Dr. Harris greeted me with his usual cheerful smile. "Everything all right?" "I suppose that depends." I told him what had happened. His smile faded. "Would you like us to put a password on your medical file? We can require it before accepting appointment changes over the phone." The suggestion surprised me. "You've had patients deal with this before." He nodded carefully. "Sometimes family members become overly involved." Overly involved, a remarkably polite phrase. I agreed to the password. When I left the office, I sat inside my car for several minutes without starting the engine. Emily had canceled a medical appointment without asking me. Why? It made no sense. She wasn't keeping me from receiving treatment. The appointment was routine. Unless it wasn't about the appointment at all. Unless it was about creating a pattern. Missed appointments. Forgotten obligations. Small examples that could someday support a much larger narrative. I immediately disliked where my own thoughts were going. No, I was being dramatic. Emily was my daughter. She loved me. Didn't she? For the next several weeks, I said nothing. Instead, I watched. Watching had once been my profession. Most people underestimate how much they reveal when they think no one is observing. Emily visited every Saturday morning. She'd make coffee, water my plants, organize something that didn't need organizing. Then she'd casually ask questions. "Have you remembered to pay the electric bill?" "Yes." "What about your homeowner's insurance?" "Already renewed." "You still balancing your investments yourself?" "I enjoy it." Oh. Always oh. As though my competence disappointed her. One Saturday, she wandered into my home office. "I'll help you straighten these files." "They're already straight." She laughed. "You've always been so particular." That wasn't untrue. Every file cabinet in my office had remained organized for 40 years. Every document labeled, every folder dated, every signature easy to locate. Organization isn't perfectionism, it's preparation. She spent several minutes standing beside the filing cabinet before finally walking away. When she left that afternoon, I instinctively checked the cabinet. Nothing appeared disturbed. Still, something felt wrong. Not visibly wrong. Professionally wrong. Like entering a courtroom where everyone smiles just a little too much. A few days later, I decided to perform a simple experiment. I placed a plain white envelope inside the top drawer of my desk. There was nothing inside except a blank sheet of paper. Across the flap, invisible to anyone else, I drew the tiniest graphite mark with a mechanical pencil. Barely noticeable. Unless you knew exactly where to look. No one had any reason to touch that envelope. Certainly not me. 3 days later, Emily stopped by unexpectedly while I was trimming rose bushes in the backyard. She called out, "Mom, I'm outside." She walked through the gate carrying a bag of groceries. "I figured you could use these." "That's thoughtful. I'll just put everything away." By the time I finished in the garden nearly 20 minutes later, she'd already stocked my refrigerator. We chatted briefly. She hugged me. Then she left. After her car disappeared around the corner, I walked calmly into my office. The envelope remained inside the drawer. but my tiny pencil mark no longer lined up. Someone had opened it, carefully, then sealed it again. The average person would never have noticed. I had spent years examining questioned documents under magnification. I noticed. I stood there for a long moment staring at an envelope that contained absolutely nothing. Why would anyone open it, unless they believed it contained something important, unless they were searching for what a revised will property records, investment information trust documents. I closed the drawer without touching anything else. That evening I called my oldest friend Margaret. She had worked beside me as a paralegal for nearly 25 years before retiring. If anyone understood the difference between suspicion and evidence, it was Margaret. "You sound troubled," she said after hearing my story. "I feel ridiculous. Because, because every piece of this has an innocent explanation." And together, I was silent. She answered her own question. Together they become a pattern. Exactly. That's what frightened me. Not one missing statement. Not one canceled appointment. Not one opened envelope. Patterns. Patterns destroy coincidence. Before hanging up, Margaret asked one final question. "Have you told Emily you noticed any of this?" "No." "Good." "Why good?" "Because if someone is testing your awareness, the worst thing you can do is announce where your line is." I understood immediately. If Emily truly was crossing boundaries, she needed to believe I remained completely unaware. The following Sunday, our family gathered after church for lunch at Emily's house. Ryan grilled hamburgers, while my 15-year-old grandson Noah helped set the patio table. He had always been a sweet boy, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of teenager who still held doors open for strangers without being reminded. As we carried plates outside, Noah accidentally bumped into me. A stack of napkins slipped from his hands. We both bent to pick them up. Without looking at me, he whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Grandma." His voice trembled. "I saw Mom shredding papers with your name on them." Before I could respond, Emily called from the deck. "Noah, bring the ketchup." He looked at me with frightened eyes. Then he hurried away as though the conversation had never happened. I remained kneeling beside the scattered napkins for several seconds. The summer breeze rustled the maple trees overhead. Children laughed somewhere down the street. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, but deep inside me something shifted. Until that moment, I had hoped I was simply imagining connections where none existed. Noah's whispered words erased that hope. Someone wasn't just crossing boundaries anymore. Someone was hiding evidence. And for the first time since Michael died, I realized I might not simply be grieving the loss of my husband. I might be preparing to defend myself against my own daughter. Noah's whisper stayed with me long after lunch ended. "I saw Mom shredding papers with your name on them." He hadn't sounded angry. He hadn't sounded dramatic. He had sounded frightened. That difference mattered. Teenagers are surprisingly poor liars when they're protecting themselves, but they become painfully convincing when they're trying to protect someone they love. Noah loved his mother. For him to say those words at all meant the burden had become too heavy for a 15-year-old to carry alone. I drove home slowly that afternoon. The roads were lined with towering oak trees whose leaves had just begun turning shades of gold and crimson. Autumn had always been my favorite season. Michael used to joke that I loved October because the entire state looked as though someone had painted it by hand. Normally, I would have admired every mile. That day, I barely noticed the scenery. Instead, I replayed every conversation Emily and I had shared over the previous year. Every offer to help, every question about my finances, every suggestion that I simplify my life. Each memory settled into a new place, like pieces of a puzzle finally recognizing one another. Still, I refused to jump to conclusions. Suspicion is not proof. I had spent 40 years reminding clients of that very principle. If I allowed emotion to replace evidence simply because Emily was my daughter, I would become exactly the kind of person I had warned others not to become. So I made myself one promise. I would investigate quietly. Nothing more, nothing less. The following Tuesday, I received an unexpected phone call. The number looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. "Patricia Reynolds speaking." A warm male voice answered. Patricia, I'm not catching you at a bad time, am I? For a moment I searched my memory. Then I smiled. Thomas Whitaker, the one and only. Thomas had once been one of my youngest clients. 25 years earlier, he had inherited a struggling family manufacturing company after his father died unexpectedly. I had helped him untangle an incredibly complicated estate that nearly ended in litigation between four siblings. Back then, he was barely 30. Today, he managed one of the largest regional banks in Central Virginia. I was thinking about you last month, I said honestly. I hope that's a good sign. It means you're getting older. He laughed. I suppose we both are. We exchanged a few minutes of pleasant conversation before his tone became noticeably more careful. Patricia, there's actually another reason I called. Immediately, every instinct I possessed became alert. I'm listening. I debated whether I should make this call. I appreciate that. You've always appreciated discretion. That sentence alone told me this wasn't a social conversation anymore. Thomas lowered his voice. I need to be careful because of banking regulations. Of course. I cannot disclose confidential customer information. I understand. But, he hesitated. If I believed someone I respected might be vulnerable, I'd probably find a reason to check in. I remained silent. He knew silence had always been my preferred way of encouraging people to continue speaking. Finally, he sighed. Has anyone recently asked you to sign new financial documents? No. Have you granted anyone power of attorney? No. Another pause. Then he asked a question that made my heartbeat quicken. Have you personally visited any of our branches in the past 3 weeks? I haven't. I thought so. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Thomas continued carefully. Someone visited our downtown branch asking general questions regarding trust administration. What kind of questions? The kind family members often ask when assisting elderly relatives. I see. The employee who assisted them became uncomfortable. Why? Because the visitor implied authority they couldn't document. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Who was the visitor? Thomas didn't answer immediately. I can't officially identify customers or visitors. I understand. But, another long silence. Then he chose his words with remarkable precision. If you happen to review publicly available security footage from businesses surrounding our branch, he stopped. You might recognize someone entering the building. My years in law had taught me how professionals communicated without violating ethical boundaries. Thomas wasn't telling me. He was directing me. There are cameras outside the neighboring pharmacy, he added casually. Interesting. And the coffee shop across the street records its entrance. I appreciate the conversation. So do I. Before hanging up, he said one final sentence. Take care of yourself, Patricia. There was unusual weight behind those words. I thanked him and ended the call. Within an hour, I found myself standing inside the pharmacy Thomas had mentioned. I wasn't there to investigate anyone. At least that was what I told myself. The manager recognized me immediately. Mrs. Reynolds, good to see you. I smiled politely. After purchasing a bottle of vitamins, I explained that I was trying to determine whether my own car had been parked outside the previous week after someone borrowed it. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The manager agreed to review exterior security footage. We scrolled through recordings together. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then Thursday morning. There, the manager said. A familiar silver SUV entered the parking lot. Emily's SUV. She parked near the bank, stepped out, adjusted her jacket, looked around, then walked directly towards the bank entrance carrying a leather portfolio I had never seen before. The timestamp showed she remained inside for nearly 30 minutes. When she emerged, her smile was gone. Instead, she looked frustrated, almost angry. She climbed into her SUV and drove away. I watched the recording twice, then a third time. The manager looked at me curiously. Everything okay? Yes. It was a lie. I thanked him and walked outside. The crisp autumn air suddenly felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Thomas had been right. Emily had visited the bank. Now I knew, but I still didn't know why. That evening, I sat in Michael's old leather chair in the den. Whenever I faced a difficult decision during my career, I often sat there after dinner while Michael pretended to read the newspaper. He never offered legal advice. He simply listened. Sometimes that's the greatest gift another person can give you. I caught myself glancing toward his empty chair across the room. "I wish you were here," I whispered. The silence answered me. The next morning, I decided to stop wondering and start verifying. I drove to my own bank branch and requested a routine review of every account connected to my name. The representative printed recent activity: deposits, automatic bill payments, interest. Nothing unusual. Then I asked another question. "Has anyone requested information about my accounts?" She checked the notes attached to my customer profile. There was an inquiry. When? About 3 weeks ago. What kind of inquiry? The visitor asked general questions regarding account administration if a customer became medically incapable. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. Calm is often more useful than panic. "Did you provide any information?" "No." "Why not?" "They lacked proper authorization." Exactly as Thomas had implied. "Did they identify themselves?" The representative hesitated. "I'm probably not supposed to." "It's all right. They said they were your daughter." There it was. Not suspicion, not instinct, not coincidence, a confirmed fact. Emily had attempted to obtain information she wasn't legally entitled to receive. I thanked the representative for her professionalism and left without another question. As I walked toward my car, one realization settled heavily over me. Emily hadn't asked for money. She hadn't requested access. She had been gathering information, studying procedures, learning what documents she would eventually need. That wasn't impulsive behavior. That was preparation. The lawyer inside me recognized the pattern immediately. Someone doesn't research authority unless they expect to exercise it. Someone doesn't ask about incapacity unless they intend to argue it someday. And for the first time, I began asking myself the question I had desperately avoided. Was my daughter preparing to convince the world that I was no longer capable of managing my own life? If that was true, then whatever she had planned was far more dangerous than simply persuading me to sell my house. For 2 nights, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid. Fear had never been particularly useful to me. Instead, my mind kept arranging facts the way it had during thousands of legal cases over 4 decades. Missing financial statements, a canceled medical appointment, questions about incapacity, a visit to the bank. Noah's frightened whisper. None of those facts proved Emily intended to steal from me, but together they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. The most dangerous mistakes I had witnessed in probate court were rarely committed by people who lacked evidence. They were committed by people who waited too long to gather it. I refused to become one of them. There was only one person I trusted enough to discuss everything openly: Daniel Brooks. Daniel had started as a young associate in my law firm nearly 20 years before I retired. Fresh out of law school, he had possessed more confidence than experience, but he listened carefully and learned quickly. By the time I retired, he had become one of the finest estate attorneys in the state. More importantly, he understood me. He knew I wasn't prone to exaggeration. If I asked for a private meeting, something truly mattered. I called his office the next morning. "Daniel Brooks speaking." "It's Patricia." His voice immediately brightened. "Patricia, I was just thinking about you." "I hope that's not because you've inherited one of my impossible clients." He laughed. "No, although I still use half the lessons you taught me. I need an hour of your time." The laughter disappeared. "When today? I'll clear my afternoon." His office overlooked the historic downtown district of Richmond. Walking inside felt strangely familiar, as though I had stepped backward into my own career. Shelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes lined the walls. Framed certificates hung neatly beside photographs of Daniel's wife and 2 daughters. He greeted me with a warm hug. "You look healthy." "I am. But not comfortable." "No." He closed the office door himself before inviting me to sit. Then he waited. Good lawyers understand the value of silence. I spent nearly an hour describing everything: the missing mail, the canceled doctor's appointment, the bank inquiry, the pharmacy footage, Noah's warning. Daniel interrupted only to clarify dates or ask precise questions. When I finally finished, he folded his hands across his desk. "First," he said quietly, "I'm very glad you came." I almost didn't. I know. I kept telling myself maybe I was imagining patterns. What you're describing isn't imagination. It isn't proof either. No, he nodded. But it deserves attention. I felt myself exhale for what seemed like the first time all week. I don't want to accuse my own daughter unfairly. And you shouldn't. So what do I do? Daniel stood and walked toward one of his filing cabinets. "I want to show you something." He returned carrying a thin folder. "This case closed about 8 months ago." He opened it carefully. "A 74-year-old widower," I read silently. His daughter had gradually taken over scheduling appointments, handling bills, collecting mail. Eventually, she petitioned the court for guardianship, arguing her father had become forgetful. "Was he?" Daniel shook his head. "He occasionally misplaced his reading glasses." "That's hardly incompetence." "Exactly." The daughter had spent almost 2 years quietly creating documentation suggesting otherwise. Missed appointments, late bill payments, confusion. Each incident carefully encouraged rather than invented. The court ultimately rejected her petition after extensive medical evaluations, but only because someone recognized the pattern in time. I closed the folder. "You're wondering if someone could be building a similar narrative about me." Daniel looked directly into my eyes. "I'm wondering if someone has already started." The room became painfully quiet. Finally, I asked, "What should I protect first?" He answered without hesitation, "The truth." I smiled faintly. "That's wonderfully philosophical." "I mean it literally." He pulled a legal pad toward himself. "We document everything." For the next 40 minutes, we created an extraordinarily detailed timeline. Dates, conversations, phone calls, witnesses, bank visits, medical appointments. Nothing was too small. Evidence often begins looking insignificant. Only later does it become essential. When we finished, Daniel leaned back. "Now there's one question I need to ask." "Go ahead." "Has anyone asked you to sign documents recently?" I thought for a moment. "No. Not even routine paperwork. Nothing unusual." He frowned slightly. "I wish I found that reassuring." "You expected otherwise." "Actually." He hesitated. "Yes." He opened another drawer and removed a photocopy. "I debated whether to mention this." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "A few weeks ago, someone requested an appointment through my receptionist. I don't remember calling." "You didn't." He slid the paper across the desk. The visitor had written my name, my address, my phone number, everything accurate, except the signature. I stared at it. At first glance, it looked convincing, very convincing. The looping P, the angled R, the long underline beneath my last name. Most people would have accepted it immediately. I didn't. "It's wrong," Daniel nodded. "I thought you'd notice." I pointed toward the capital R. "I stopped making that upward stroke nearly 15 years ago after developing arthritis in my wrist." "Exactly." Then I pointed toward another detail. The spacing between Patricia and Reynolds. Too wide. "My signature has never looked like this." Daniel smiled sadly. "Someone spent time studying it." The realization sent a chill through me. Not because the forgery was poor, because it was good. Good enough to fool almost everyone except me. "What did they want?" I asked. "They requested information regarding revisions to your estate documents." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "Why?" "Because whoever visited wasn't you." I looked up sharply. "You knew immediately." "I've watched you sign documents for 18 years. He smiled gently. "Besides," he tapped the paper, "you always date paperwork before signing." I couldn't help laughing despite everything. "I suppose I do." "You also bring your own fountain pen." Michael had given me that pen on my 50th birthday. I had used it almost every working day since. Small habits, tiny details. Sometimes they save lives. What happened after you refused? The visitor became persistent. Who was it? Daniel paused. I never actually met her. Him. My receptionist handled the initial meeting. What did she say? Daniel pressed the intercom. Linda, would you come in for a moment? A woman in her early 60s entered carrying a notebook. She smiled warmly when she recognized me. Mrs. Reynolds, it's lovely to see you. You too, Linda. Daniel explained why she'd been called inside. Immediately, her expression became serious. I remember that appointment. You do. Very clearly. What stood out? Linda thought carefully. The woman introduced herself as your daughter, Emily. Even though I had already expected the answer, hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. She said you weren't feeling well enough to come yourself. My heart sank. Linda continued. She asked whether your trust could be updated if she brought signed paperwork. What did you tell her? That we'd need to speak with you directly. And then, Linda hesitated. She became irritated. In what way? She kept saying families shouldn't have to jump through unnecessary legal hoops. Daniel smiled without humor. I imagine Linda explained that legal hoops exist for very good reasons. Linda nodded. I told her our responsibility was protecting clients. How did she respond? I'll never forget her exact words. She took a slow breath. My mother trusts me completely. She doesn't need to know every little detail. Silence settled over the office. That sentence echoed through my mind. She doesn't need to know. Not she won't understand. Not she's incapable. Simply, she doesn't need to know. That wasn't concern. That was control. Daniel waited until Linda quietly left the room. Then he spoke softly. Patricia. Yes. I want you to hear this as your former colleague, not just your attorney. I nodded. Whoever attempted this wasn't acting impulsively. I know. They researched procedures. I know. They practiced your signature. I know. And they expected legal professionals to lower their standards because they claimed to be family. I closed my eyes briefly. Family. The word suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Daniel reached into another folder and removed a fresh set of documents. I'd like your permission to strengthen every protection around your estate. What does that involve? Additional verification requirements. Good. In-person confirmation for major changes. Excellent. A confidential client password known only to you. I nodded again. Do all of it. He handed me my fountain pen. As I signed the new security instructions, I noticed something almost poetic. For 40 years, I had protected strangers from exactly this kind of situation. Now retired and widowed, I finally understood how difficult it was when the person you needed protection from carried your own last name. And as painful as that realization was, another thought disturbed me even more. If Emily had already tried the bank, and already tried my attorney, what would she try next? The morning after meeting Daniel, I opened a fresh leather notebook. For years, I had encouraged clients to keep written records whenever they suspected financial manipulation or family coercion. Memories fade, emotions distort details, ink remains patient. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. Everything from this day forward will be documented. Then I added the date. I wasn't preparing for a lawsuit. I was preparing for the truth. For the next several weeks, I changed nothing about my routine. That was intentional. If Emily believed I remained unaware, she would continue behaving naturally. If she sensed I had become suspicious, she might destroy evidence or change tactics. So I smiled. I accepted invitations. I answered her phone calls. I thanked her whenever she brought groceries. Meanwhile, every evening, I wrote another page in the notebook. October 14. Emily asked whether I still balanced my own investment portfolio. October 18. Emily offered to organize my filing cabinet again. October 22. Emily asked whether I had updated my homeowner's insurance. Individually, the questions meant very little. Together, they revealed a remarkable consistency. Every conversation eventually returned to my finances, not my health, not my loneliness, not my happiness, my assets. One afternoon, Daniel called. "I've found someone I'd like you to meet." "Who?" "A forensic accountant." I smiled despite myself. "You're escalating quickly." "So is whoever we're dealing with." 2 days later, I sat across from a woman named Laura Mitchell in a quiet conference room. Laura appeared to be in her early 50s with silver-framed glasses and the calm expression of someone who preferred numbers over people. "I've read Daniel's summary," she said, "but I'd rather hear everything directly from you." Unlike many financial professionals, Laura didn't interrupt. She simply listened. When I finished, she opened a laptop. "Let's begin with something simple." She asked permission to review my financial records. Within an hour, she had examined bank statements, investment summaries, tax returns, property records, and trust documents. Everything appeared normal. No unauthorized withdrawals. No missing funds. No suspicious transfers. "If someone intended immediate theft," Laura finally said, "I'd expect different patterns." "What kind?" "Large cash withdrawals. Wire transfers. New accounts." "None of that exists." I felt both relieved and confused. "So maybe I've imagined all this." Laura shook her head. "No." She rotated the laptop toward me. "I think you're looking in the wrong direction." She highlighted several public property databases, then county court records, then commercial lending records. "I'm less interested in your finances." "Then whose?" She typed 2 names. "Ryan Carter, my son-in-law." Then another, "Emily Carter." Dozens of public filings appeared. Most were ordinary: vehicle registrations, mortgage records, business licenses. Then Laura opened a recent filing involving Ryan's construction consulting company. The annual report showed declining revenue. Nothing alarming. Until she opened another document. A uniform commercial code filing. Secured debt. Then another. A civil judgment. Then another. Tax liens. I stared silently at the screen. "How much?" Laura continued searching. After nearly 20 minutes, she leaned back. "More than I expected." She printed several pages and arranged them neatly across the conference table. Business loans, personal guarantees, lines of credit, equipment financing, credit card judgments. Everything had accumulated over roughly 3 years. Around the same time, Michael became ill. "I had no idea," I whispered. "They've kept it private." "Can you estimate the total?" Laura reached for her calculator. After several adjustments, she looked at me carefully. "Approximately $870,000. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Nearly $1 million. Emily and Ryan had always appeared financially comfortable. They drove late-model vehicles, vacationed in Florida every spring, renovated their kitchen, hosted expensive birthday parties for Noah. How Laura answered before I asked. "Debt can imitate wealth for quite a while." Her words reminded me of something Michael used to say. "Some people buy the appearance of success long before they earn it." I picked up one of the judgment notices. "Why didn't Emily tell me?" Laura closed the laptop. "Because people hiding financial collapse rarely announce it." "But why my house?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up the county property assessment. The estimated market value appeared: $1.8 million. Mortgage balance: 0. I suddenly understood. No debt. Laura nodded. No mortgage. No liens. No shared ownership. A completely unencumbered property. She looked directly at me. To someone drowning in debt. "This house looks like a lifeboat." The sentence landed harder than anything else I'd heard all day. Not because it accused Emily. Because it explained her behavior. The brochures. The retirement communities. The constant questions. The attempts to gain authority. If Emily could somehow persuade me to sell or convince others I could no longer manage my affairs, millions in equity suddenly became available. Not for me. For her. As painful as that realization was, another thought hurt even more. She hadn't come to me for help. She had tried to maneuver around me instead. Laura gathered the papers into a neat stack. I need to ask something uncomfortable. Go ahead. If Emily had simply explained the situation honestly, I probably would have helped. How much? I looked toward the window. I don't know, but enough to keep my grandson from suffering. Laura studied my face. You still want to help them? I love my daughter. Even now. I smiled sadly. Love and trust aren't identical. She nodded slowly. That's a healthy distinction. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about Noah. If these debts became public, his entire world would change. He'd hear whispers at school. Friends would repeat rumors. His parents' marriage would suffer. Financial collapse never limits itself to numbers. It spreads into every room of a family's life. That evening, Emily called. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded cheerful. Hi, sweetheart. I was thinking, there was that phrase again. Maybe after Thanksgiving we could visit one of those retirement communities together. I closed my eyes briefly. Why would we do that? Oh, no pressure. She laughed. I just think it's smart to plan ahead. Plan ahead. I almost asked whether nearly $900,000 of debt had inspired that thought. Instead, I said gently, I'm very happy where I am. Silence lingered for a moment. Then she changed the subject, just as she always did. After we hung up, I opened my notebook. I added another entry. October 34th. Emily again encouraged me to consider moving. Declined politely. She immediately redirected conversation. Later that night, Daniel called. Laura updated me. I suppose she did. How are you holding up? I finally understand the motive. Yes, but motive isn't evidence. Correct. We still need proof. Daniel became unusually quiet. I've been thinking about that. So have I. I believe someone under that roof already knows more than they're saying. Immediately, one face appeared in my mind. Noah. The frightened teenager who had whispered about shredded papers. The boy who looked guilty every time his parents discussed my future. Before I could speak, Daniel continued. Be careful. I always am. I don't mean legally. What do you mean? If Noah is carrying secrets, he's caught between loyalty to his parents and love for you. I looked toward the family photographs sitting on my mantel. One picture showed Noah at 10 years old, proudly holding the first fish Michael had helped him catch. Another captured his middle school graduation. His smile had always been genuine. Recently, it had become guarded. I suddenly realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. Children often notice far more than adults realize. Not because they're investigators, because adults stop hiding once they assume children aren't paying attention. If Emily and Ryan had been discussing their financial troubles at home, if they'd been arguing late at night, if plans had been made around the dinner table, Noah might already know far more than anyone suspected. And if that was true, then the frightened whisper he had shared with me at the barbecue was probably only the beginning. Daniel's words stayed with me all week. If Noah is carrying secrets, he's caught between loyalty to his parents and love for you. The more I thought about it, the more I regretted putting him in that impossible position, even if unintentionally. He was only 15. At 15, a child should worry about algebra exams, driver's education, and whether the girl he liked would notice him at school. He shouldn't have to wonder whether telling the truth might destroy his parents' marriage. I decided not to contact him. Not yet. If Noah wanted to speak, the decision had to be his. Anything else would feel like I was asking him to choose sides. Instead, I continued living as though nothing had changed. November arrived with cold mornings and trees stripped almost bare by the wind. Emily called more frequently than usual, sometimes twice in the same day. She always sounded cheerful. How are you feeling today, Mom? Fine. Still sleeping well. Like a rock. Good. Then almost casually the conversation would drift toward my house. You know, winter maintenance on a place this size can't be easy. It keeps me active. You could always stay with us. That's kind of you. You'd never have to shovel snow again. I smiled into the phone. I've been shoveling snow longer than you've been alive. She laughed. So stubborn. No, I replied gently. Independent. There was always a brief silence after I used that word. Independent. It was the exact opposite of the image she seemed determined to create. One Saturday morning, I attended Noah's high school basketball game. He spotted me in the bleachers before warm-ups and waved enthusiastically. That alone told me something. Children avoiding guilt usually avoid eye contact. Noah didn't. He simply looked worried. After the game, which his team won by 6 points, parents and grandparents gathered outside the gymnasium. Emily hugged me. I'm glad you came. I wouldn't have missed it. Ryan joined us carrying Noah's sports bag. You should see him in practice, Ryan said proudly. Coach says he's improved more than anyone on the team. Noah rolled his eyes. Dad? Emily laughed. He's embarrassed. Watching them together, they looked like any ordinary American family. A hardworking father, a devoted mother, a teenage son, smiling, laughing, planning dinner after the game. If I hadn't known everything else, I never would have questioned a single thing. Appearances are remarkably persuasive. As we walked toward the parking lot, Noah slowed his pace until he was beside me. Emily and Ryan continued several steps ahead. Without looking directly at me, Noah asked quietly, Grandma? Yes. Can we talk sometime? My heart tightened. Whenever you're ready. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Not here. I understand. Then he hurried forward before anyone noticed we'd fallen behind. 3 days later, my phone rang just after school ended. The caller ID displayed Noah's number. Hi, sweetheart. Grandma? His voice sounded shaky. Could you meet me? Of course. Please don't tell Mom. The request broke my heart. Where? The little coffee shop near the public library. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, Noah was already sitting in a corner booth wearing his school hoodie and backpack. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I ordered hot chocolate for him and tea for myself. For nearly 2 minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I reached across the table and gently touched his hand. You don't have to protect me from the truth. His eyes filled with tears immediately. I don't want to hurt Mom. I know. I love her. I know. I love you too. I know that as well. He lowered his head. They're fighting all the time. I remained silent. Dad keeps saying everything will be okay after Christmas. My pulse slowed. After Christmas. He nodded. Mom says once everything is settled, we can finally breathe again. What does everything mean? I don't know. He rubbed his forehead. They stop talking whenever I walk into the room. Have you heard anything else? He hesitated. Then in almost a whisper he said, I heard Mom tell Dad. He swallowed hard. After Christmas, everything will belong to us. The words hung between us, exactly as he remembered them. Not almost. Exactly. I asked carefully, when did you hear that? About 3 weeks ago. Were they arguing? No. They sounded, he searched for the right word, relieved. My legal instincts urged me to ask 20 more questions. Instead, I reminded myself that I wasn't interviewing a witness. I was comforting my grandson. Noah, he looked up. None of this is your fault. I should have told someone sooner. You've told me now. What if I'm making everything worse? Truth rarely makes things worse. It just makes them visible. He nodded slowly. I found something. Those 4 words instantly captured my attention. What did you find? He unzipped his backpack carefully. From inside one of his textbooks, he removed a folded, yellow sticky note. I wasn't snooping. I believe you. It fell out of Mom's planner. He handed it to me. Written in Emily's unmistakable handwriting were only 3 lines. December 23, dinner toast, after dessert, mention last Christmas. A cold sensation spread through my chest. My fingers tightened around the note. Are you sure this is your mother's writing? I've seen her grocery lists my whole life. So yes, this wasn't evidence of fraud, it wasn't evidence of theft, but it was evidence of planning, the toast, months in advance. Whatever Emily intended for Christmas wasn't spontaneous. It had been rehearsed, prepared, expected. Noah watched my expression carefully. I'm sorry. What are you apologizing for? I feel like I'm betraying my parents. I leaned forward. Noah. He looked directly into my eyes. There is a difference between betraying someone and refusing to help them do something wrong. His shoulders relaxed just a little. I've been scared. I know. What if Mom finds out I showed you that note? She won't. I promise. He nodded. Then after another long silence, he whispered something that hurt more than anything else he'd said that afternoon. I don't recognize my mom anymore. The words came from a boy who still loved her deeply. That was obvious. He wasn't angry. He was grieving. Grieving someone who was still alive. I remembered feeling something similar during Michael's illness. Watching someone you love slowly become someone you no longer recognize is its own kind of heartbreak. When we finally stood to leave, I hugged Noah tightly. You are a good young man. I don't feel like one. Good people usually question themselves. He managed the smallest smile. Before climbing into my car, I glanced once more at the sticky note folded carefully inside my purse. Dinner toast, after dessert, last Christmas. Every word confirmed that Christmas dinner had become more than a family gathering. It had become part of a larger plan. That evening I drove directly to Daniel's office. He read the note twice, then looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not concern, resolve. This changes things. How? We no longer have only financial preparation. What do we have now? We have evidence that she's orchestrating a specific public moment. He placed the sticky note inside a clear evidence sleeve. Patricia. Yes. I think it's time we stop waiting for Christmas. I considered his words carefully. Then I slowly shook my head. No. He looked surprised. I want to know exactly how far she's willing to go. Daniel frowned. That's risky. I know. What if she acts before then? I looked out his office window toward the fading November sunset. I've spent my career watching dishonest people reveal themselves. And they almost always believe they're smarter than everyone else. I turned back toward him. If Emily thinks I've noticed anything, she'll become careful. But if she believes I'm exactly the helpless widow she's been pretending to protect, I finished the thought quietly. She'll walk straight into the truth herself. The closer Christmas came, the calmer I became. People often imagine that preparing for confrontation fills a person with anxiety. In my experience, the opposite is true. Uncertainty creates fear. Preparation creates peace. For the first time in months, I felt as though I had regained control, not because I intended to embarrass my daughter, but because I no longer intended to let her dictate what happened next. The Monday after Thanksgiving. Daniel and I met once again. He spread several folders across the conference table. We need to think about this from every angle, he said. I nodded. I've already started. I know you have. He smiled briefly before becoming serious again. If Emily is expecting to pressure you publicly during Christmas dinner, we need to make certain every important decision has already been made. I agree. The fewer opportunities she has, the better. One by one, we reviewed every legal document connected to my estate. My will, my revocable living trust, medical directives, financial powers of attorney, property records, beneficiary designations. Everything was current. Everything was valid. Still, Daniel recommended strengthening several provisions. These aren't changes to your wishes, he explained. They're safeguards. What kind? For example, no amendment to your trust can ever be accepted without an in-person meeting. Good. No financial authority can be transferred without biometric identification. Excellent. We'll also require 2 independent witnesses who have no financial interest. I smiled. I taught you well. You did. He slid another document toward me. This one is important. I adjusted my reading glasses. What is it? A statement of capacity. I raised an eyebrow. You want me evaluated. I want every possibility closed. The document authorized my physician to perform a comprehensive cognitive assessment. If someone later claims you're mentally declining, Daniel said, We'll already have objective medical evidence. I didn't hesitate. Schedule it. 3 days later, I completed nearly 2 hours of cognitive testing. Memory, problem solving, language, reasoning, attention. At the end, Dr. Harris smiled warmly. I wish all 67-year-olds performed this well. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. A week later, his formal report concluded that I was fully competent to manage every aspect of my personal and financial affairs. Daniel placed the original in my legal file. Another copy remained in my safe. Another stayed with my physician. Another sat inside my home office. One less door for manipulation. But we weren't finished. Laura Mitchell, the forensic accountant, had continued reviewing public financial records involving Emily and Ryan. When she arrived at Daniel's office that Friday, she carried another thick folder. I found something. Neither Daniel nor I interrupted. Laura laid several documents across the table. Ryan refinanced his business equipment twice. She pointed toward the dates. Both loans are already in default. She turned another page. 2 commercial credit lines were frozen. Another. A private lender filed notice demanding immediate repayment. I studied the numbers. The total debt now exceeded $900,000. How long do they have? I asked. Laura answered quietly. Not long. She handed me one final document. A letter from a commercial collection firm. The deadline, December 27th, 3 days after Christmas. I slowly leaned back. So that's why Christmas matters. Daniel nodded. If they don't solve this before the deadline, they could lose everything. I looked down at the papers again. For a brief moment, compassion almost overwhelmed caution. Emily wasn't a stranger. She was my daughter. The little girl who once cried because she thought a wounded bird outside our house looked lonely. The teenager who stayed awake all night, helping Michael wrap Christmas presents when I had the flu. The young woman who held my hand during my husband's funeral. Where had that daughter gone? Or had desperation simply buried her beneath fear? Daniel seemed to read my thoughts. You still want to save her? I do. But I can't save someone who's willing to destroy another person first. He nodded. That's the difference. That evening, I returned home and unlocked the antique wall safe hidden behind a painting in my study. Inside rested the original documents that represented nearly everything Michael and I had built together. The deed to the house, investment certificates, insurance policies, our trust, Michael's handwritten letters. I carefully removed each item, not because I distrusted the safe, because I wanted every original document somewhere no one expected. The next morning, I rented a secure bank safe deposit box under my name alone. Only Daniel knew it existed. The originals went there. Inside my home safe, I left only certified copies. If someone searched my house, they would believe they had found everything. In reality, they would have found almost nothing. Preparation, not revenge. That became my quiet motto every morning. During the following week, I began making one final series of arrangements. Christmas dinner would still take place at my home, exactly as it had every year since Michael and I bought the house. The guest list remained unchanged. Emily, Ryan, Noah, my sister Helen, my cousin Margaret, several close family friends. Nothing unusual, except for one additional invitation. Daniel Brooks. When I called him, he laughed. You want your attorney at Christmas dinner? I want an old family friend. I haven't attended Christmas dinner at your house in 15 years. Then everyone will simply think we're renewing an old tradition. He understood immediately. You believe Emily won't object. She won't. And if she does, she'll have to explain why my longtime attorney makes her uncomfortable. Daniel chuckled. Fair point. I won't introduce you as my lawyer. I'd prefer not. You're coming because you've been alone since your daughters moved across the country. Conveniently true. Exactly. No lies, just incomplete explanations. As Christmas decorations slowly filled the house, I found myself pausing often in front of Michael's favorite ornament, a small wooden angel our grandson had carved in elementary school. Michael always insisted it belonged at the very top of the tree. It's crooked, I used to complain. So are most families. He would grin. That's what makes them beautiful. I smiled sadly at the memory. Our family had become more crooked than either of us ever imagined. Still, I wasn't giving up. Late one afternoon, Noah stopped by unexpectedly after school. He claimed he wanted to return a casserole dish. I suspected he simply wanted reassurance. While hot chocolate warmed on the stove, he quietly asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay." "You don't look scared." I smiled. "Should I?" He hesitated. "I don't know." I reached across the kitchen island. "Noah." "Yeah. Whatever happens at Christmas, remember something." "What?" "The truth doesn't destroy families." He frowned slightly. "What does lies that are allowed to grow?" He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said." "About what?" "The difference between betraying someone and refusing to help them do something wrong." "I'm glad. I think I understand now." His voice sounded stronger than it had at the coffee shop. Not happy, but steadier. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "Grandma." "Yes." "I don't think Mom knows you know anything." "I don't think she does either." He looked relieved. Then he said something that confirmed every instinct I'd trusted over the past several months. "She's been practicing." I felt a chill. "Practicing what?" He swallowed. "Her Christmas toast." After he left, I stood alone in the quiet hallway for several minutes. Practicing. Not planning. Not thinking. Practicing. That meant the speech had become important enough to rehearse. Important enough to perfect. I looked toward the dining room, where in just a couple of weeks my family would gather around the same oak table Michael had built with his own hands more than 30 years earlier. Emily believed Christmas dinner would be the moment she finally gained control. She had no idea that every legal protection was already in place. Every important document had been secured. Every trusted ally had been quietly positioned. She was preparing for a performance. I was preparing for the truth. And soon we would both be sitting at the same table. Christmas Day arrived wrapped in fresh snow. When I opened my front door just after 7 that morning, the world outside looked almost untouched. A thin blanket of white covered the front lawn, the maple trees and the stone walkway Michael had laid by hand nearly 30 years earlier. The silence reminded me of every Christmas morning we had shared together. For a few precious minutes before anyone arrived, I allowed myself to miss him. I carried 2 mugs of coffee into the living room out of habit. One for me. One for the man who would never again sit in his favorite chair. After several seconds, I smiled, poured the untouched coffee back into the pot, and whispered, "I could use your advice today." The empty room offered none. I relied on something Michael had given me long before he died. Courage. By 10 o'clock, the house smelled exactly as it always had on Christmas. Roasted turkey, sweet potatoes with brown sugar and pecans, fresh dinner rolls, cinnamon, pumpkin pie. The recipes hadn't changed in decades. I wanted nothing about today to seem unusual. The Christmas tree glowed softly beside the fireplace. Family photographs covered the mantel. Every detail looked warm, welcoming, safe. That was important, because what was about to happen deserved to unfold in ordinary surroundings. At 11:30, my sister Helen arrived carrying homemade cranberry bread. She hugged me tightly. "You look peaceful." "I am." She studied my face for a moment. "Michael would be proud of you." Those words nearly brought tears to my eyes. I hope so. A few minutes later, my cousin Margaret arrived, followed by 2 longtime family friends, Richard and Elaine. Daniel came precisely at noon. He carried a bottle of sparkling cider and a pecan pie. I couldn't arrive empty-handed. "You never do." I introduced him exactly as planned. "Everyone remembers Daniel. He worked with me years ago." Richard laughed. "The young attorney who was always carrying 5 legal pads." Daniel grinned. "I've upgraded to a tablet." The conversation flowed naturally. No one suspected anything. Finally, just after 12:30, Emily's silver SUV pulled into the driveway. My heartbeat remained steady. Ryan stepped out first, then Noah. Emily emerged last, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift basket. She smiled warmly as she hurried toward the front porch. "Merry Christmas, Mom." She embraced me tightly. For just a moment, I allowed myself to wonder whether I had misunderstood everything, whether desperation had frightened her, but not changed her heart. Then she whispered in my ear, "You've done too much cooking. Next year we'll simplify things." Simplify. That word again. I simply smiled. "Maybe." She stepped inside. Within minutes, the house filled with conversation and laughter. If anyone had taken a photograph, it would have looked like the perfect American family Christmas. Ryan joked with Richard about football. Helen helped Noah arrange desserts. Margaret admired the Christmas tree. Emily moved effortlessly between guests, refilling drinks and complimenting decorations. She played the devoted daughter perfectly. And I realized something important. She truly believed she was going to win. People behave differently when they expect victory. They become relaxed, confident, careless. Lunch began a little after 1. Conversation stayed comfortably ordinary. Holiday travel, college football, favorite Christmas memories. At one point, Noah caught my eye across the table. He looked nervous. I gave him the smallest reassuring smile I could manage. He lowered his shoulders slightly. I wanted him to know he wasn't alone anymore. As dessert approached, Emily volunteered to clear the dinner plates. "I've got everything," she insisted. "You all stay seated." She disappeared into the kitchen carrying several dishes. Through the doorway, I watched her pause. She took a slow breath, looked at her own reflection in the microwave door, smoothed her sweater, almost as though she were preparing for a performance. Noah had been right. She had practiced this. When she returned carrying slices of pie, her smile appeared almost radiant. Ryan looked unusually tense. He kept checking his watch, then glancing toward Emily. She answered each glance with the slightest nod. Their silent communication no longer escaped my notice. They were waiting for the right moment. Coffee was served, dessert plates slowly emptied. The room settled into that comfortable post-meal warmth unique to Christmas gatherings. Then Emily stood. She gently tapped a spoon against her champagne glass. The soft ringing sound immediately quieted the room, exactly as she'd expected. "I'd like to say a few words." Everyone smiled. Of course she would. Emily had always enjoyed giving holiday toasts. She lifted her glass. "I've been thinking about family." Her voice sounded calm, confident. "So much changes as we grow older." Several guests nodded. She continued, "We all reach moments when we have to let go of the past and embrace new beginnings." I watched every face around the table. Helen smiled politely. Richard listened attentively. Margaret looked curious. Daniel remained perfectly expressionless. Emily turned toward me. "Mom," her smile somehow became even sweeter. "I just want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for us." "Thank you. You've always put family first." "I tried. You've worked hard your whole life." "I have. And I think—" She paused dramatically. "It's finally time for someone to take care of you." The room remained silent. She raised her champagne glass higher. "So I'd like everyone to join me." Another pause. "In celebrating Mom's last Christmas in this house." A nervous laugh escaped someone near the end of the table. Emily continued before anyone could respond. "Next year, hopefully, she'll be somewhere much easier to manage." She laughed softly. "Maybe somewhere with less maintenance." Then came the sentence I had heard in my imagination 100 times since Noah handed me that sticky note. "And maybe her last holiday where she has to worry about anything at all." Several guests looked uncertain. Helen stopped smiling. Richard frowned slightly. Ryan quickly lifted his own glass. To Patricia. Only 2 or 3 people joined him. The room had become strangely uncomfortable. Everyone sensed something wasn't right. Emily looked around expectantly, waiting for applause, waiting for agreement, waiting for me. I slowly picked up my own champagne glass. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Then I smiled. "That's—" I let the silence linger just long enough. A very interesting toast, sweetheart. For the first time all afternoon, confidence disappeared from Emily's face. Only for a second. But I saw it. A flicker of uncertainty. She hadn't expected me to answer so calmly. She certainly hadn't expected me to smile. I raised my glass slightly. And thank you, she blinked, for reminding me how important honesty is during the holidays. A few puzzled glances passed around the table. Emily forced another smile. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh. I set my glass down carefully. You will. Then I turned toward everyone else. Before anyone leaves today, I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. I'd like to share a little Christmas surprise of my own. The room fell completely silent. Emily's smile froze. Ryan's face lost its color. Across the table, Daniel quietly folded his hands. Everything we had prepared over the past 2 months had led to this exact moment. Emily believed her toast had begun the final act. She had no idea. The real story was only beginning. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The only sound in the dining room was the quiet crackle of the fire in the living room and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock Michael had inherited from his father. Emily remained standing, her champagne glass still raised halfway in the air. Ryan stared at me with growing uncertainty. Helen looked from my face to Emily's, clearly trying to understand what had just happened. Only Daniel appeared completely unsurprised. I smiled gently at everyone around the table. I know Christmas isn't usually the time for serious conversations, I said, but sometimes the greatest gift we can give one another is the truth. Emily laughed nervously. Mom, I was only making a sentimental toast. I know. I think maybe you're taking it a little too seriously. I don't believe I am. She slowly lowered her glass. What exactly is this Christmas surprise? Instead of answering immediately, I stood and walked toward the antique sideboard against the dining room wall. Earlier that morning, before anyone arrived, I had placed several large cream-colored envelopes inside its bottom drawer. I opened it calmly. One by one, I removed the envelopes. There were 7 in total. Each bore a handwritten name: Helen, Margaret, Richard, Elaine, Ryan, Emily. Daniel already knew everything. He didn't need one. I returned to the table and placed an envelope in front of each guest. Emily frowned. What is this? A little reading material. Ryan forced a laugh. Mom, you're making this sound like a board meeting. In a way, I replied softly, it is. No one opened the envelopes. They waited. I nodded. Please. Paper rustled around the table. Emily hesitated longer than everyone else before finally sliding the documents out. The first page inside every envelope was identical. It contained a simple timeline. October 14, missing financial statement. October 22, medical appointment canceled without authorization. November 3, unauthorized inquiry at my bank. November 11, attempt to obtain estate information from my attorney. November 18, evidence of forged signature. November 27, witness statement regarding destroyed documents. December 3, public financial records documenting nearly $900,000 in debt connected to Ryan Carter's business interests. The room became so quiet that I could hear someone breathing unevenly. Helen looked up first. Patricia? She barely whispered my name. What is all this, the truth? Emily turned pale. This is ridiculous. She hadn't even reached the second page yet. The second page contained still photographs printed from the pharmacy's exterior security footage. One image showed Emily walking toward the bank carrying the leather portfolio. Another showed her leaving nearly 30 minutes later. The timestamp appeared clearly beneath each photograph. Richard adjusted his reading glasses. Emily, she immediately shook her head. I went there for Mom. I never asked you to. I was helping. The confidence in her voice had already begun to crack. I watched quietly. Years earlier, I had learned something valuable. People often reveal more when they are allowed to keep talking. Ryan finally spoke. Patricia, surely there's some misunderstanding. I hope there was. There has to be. I nodded toward the next page. Keep reading. The third document was a copy of the forged signature submitted to Daniel's office. Beside it appeared one of my authentic signatures. Daniel had highlighted several clear differences: pen pressure, letter spacing, stroke direction, natural rhythm. Anyone who looked closely could immediately see they weren't written by the same hand. Emily stared at the page. She didn't touch it. She simply stared. Then she looked directly at Daniel. "You gave her confidential information," Daniel answered calmly. "I gave my client information regarding her own affairs. You had no right. I had every legal right." His voice never rose. "I refused to discuss your visit because you lacked authorization. You don't know why I came. I know exactly why you said you came." Silence. Daniel continued. "You introduced yourself as Patricia Reynolds' daughter." Emily swallowed. "You requested information concerning revisions to her trust." I. You presented a document bearing what purported to be Patricia's signature." Ryan suddenly looked toward his wife. "You told me they never even looked at the paperwork." Emily didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "This isn't what it looks like." I finally spoke. "Then tell us." Everyone turned toward her. The room no longer felt like Christmas dinner. It felt like a courtroom, except no one was interested in punishment, only honesty. Emily took a slow breath. "I was trying to help." "How?" "You've been alone since Dad died." "I have." "You shouldn't have to manage everything by yourself." "I've managed very well." "You think you have." She leaned forward. "I was planning ahead." "For what?" "For when." Her voice trailed away. "When, what?" "When you eventually couldn't." There it was. The argument she had been building for months. Not directly, gradually, patiently. I reached into my sweater pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. Dr. Harris's formal cognitive evaluation. I handed copies to Helen and Richard, then to Margaret. Finally, I slid one across the table toward Emily. She unfolded it slowly. The conclusion appeared at the bottom in bold type. "Patient demonstrates no evidence of cognitive impairment and remains fully capable of managing personal, financial, and legal affairs independently." Emily's shoulders dropped. "You took a competency evaluation?" "Yes." "When?" "3 weeks ago." "You planned all this?" "I prepared." "There's a difference." Ryan rubbed both hands across his face. His expression had changed completely. He looked confused, then frightened, then angry, but not at me, at Emily. He picked up another page from the envelope. The public debt summary. His eyes widened. "You included this." "I didn't create it." Laura had obtained every document from publicly available court records. Nothing inside those envelopes had been stolen. Nothing had been fabricated. Everything could be independently verified. Ryan looked toward his wife. "You told me no one knew." Emily didn't answer. "You said your mom had no idea." Still nothing. He spoke more sharply. "You said we'd have time." Helen looked between them. "What debt?" No one answered immediately. Richard quietly flipped through the documents until he reached the financial summary. "Oh." That single syllable carried more weight than an entire speech. Nearly $900,000. Commercial defaults. Collection actions. Pending legal demands. Every page painted the same picture. Emily finally looked at me again. "You investigated us." "No. I protected myself." "Those aren't the same thing." "They became the same thing when you started hiding things from me." Tears began forming in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." I believed part of that statement. People rarely begin by wanting to hurt someone they love. They convince themselves the harm is temporary, necessary, justified. "I know." She looked surprised. "You know." "I know you didn't wake up one morning hoping to betray your mother." Her breathing became uneven. But somewhere along the way, I looked at the debt records lying in front of her. "You decided solving your problems mattered more than respecting my choices." She opened her mouth, closed it again. No words came. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan slowly pushed his chair back. Not to leave, to stand. He looked at everyone around the table before finally looking at me. There are things, his voice cracked, that Patricia doesn't know. Emily's head snapped toward him. Ryan. He ignored her. I think, he swallowed hard. I need to tell everyone the rest. Emily stood abruptly. No. Her voice was louder than anyone had heard all day. We are not doing this. Ryan met her eyes. We already are. For the first time since Christmas dinner had begun, I saw genuine panic spread across Emily's face. Not because of the documents, not because of the forgery, because whatever Ryan was about to reveal, she hadn't planned for it. Ryan remained standing beside his chair. His hands trembled slightly as he looked around the dining room. No one interrupted him, not even Emily. The confidence she had carried all afternoon had vanished. Her shoulders were rigid, and her eyes darted anxiously between Ryan and the documents spread across the table. Ryan, she whispered. Please. He closed his eyes briefly. I can't keep lying. Those 6 words seemed to drain every remaining color from Emily's face. Don't do this here. He looked at her sadly. There isn't going to be a better place. The room remained silent. Even the fire in the living room seemed quieter. Ryan turned toward me first. Patricia. His voice was rough. I'm sorry. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I nodded once. He continued. When my business started struggling 2 years ago, I thought I could fix everything. He gave a hollow laugh. Every contractor thinks the next project will solve the last mistake. No one moved. The next project failed. So I borrowed more. Then interest rates climbed. One client declared bankruptcy. Another refused final payment. Each sentence came slowly as though every confession weighed more than the last. I kept telling Emily it was temporary. He looked toward his wife. And at first, I believed it. Emily lowered her head. Ryan continued. I refinanced equipment. I borrowed against future contracts. I used personal credit cards to pay business debt. He shook his head. That's when everything started falling apart. Helen quietly asked, Why didn't you ask family for help? Ryan smiled bitterly. Because I was embarrassed. I've spent my whole life believing a man is supposed to solve his own problems. He looked at me. I should have come to you. Yes, I know. Another long silence settled over the room. Then Ryan said something I hadn't expected. I never wanted your house. Every eye shifted toward him. I wanted another 6 months. He rubbed both hands across his face. Just enough time to save the business. I studied him carefully. Unlike Emily, he wasn't trying to sound convincing. He sounded exhausted. There is a difference. Emily suddenly stood. Stop making this sound like it's all my fault. Ryan looked at her. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Emily. No. She turned toward everyone else. None of you understand. Her breathing quickened. My father died. She pointed toward me. My mother shut everyone out. I frowned. I never shut you out. You wouldn't listen. I listened. You refused every suggestion. Because they weren't my wishes. They were practical. They were yours. For the first time all afternoon, anger appeared in her voice. I watched you live alone in that giant house. You barely used half the rooms. You spent holidays by yourself after Dad died. I wanted you somewhere safer. I answered quietly. I never spent holidays alone. She stopped speaking. I always invited you. I always invited Ryan. I always invited Noah. This house was full every Christmas. Her mouth opened, closed again. She couldn't deny it. Richard finally spoke. Emily. He chose his words carefully. Wanting your mother somewhere safe isn't the issue. The issue is everything that came after. He tapped the stack of documents. The bank. The attorney. The forged signature. Emily stared at the table. I never intended to use it. Daniel spoke for the first time in several minutes. Then why create it? No answer. Helen asked softly, Emily. Again. Nothing. Finally she whispered, I panicked. Those 2 words changed the atmosphere. Until that moment, she had defended herself. Now, she was admitting something. I knew Mom would never agree. So I started thinking. She wiped tears from her face. What if I handled everything for her? I asked quietly, without asking me. I thought eventually you'd understand. When? After. After what? After everything worked. I shook my head slowly. That's not how trust works. She looked at me desperately. I wasn't trying to steal from you. No. I was trying to save us. And in the process, I gently lifted the forged signature from the table. You became willing to pretend I had signed something I never saw. She began crying openly. I know. I know. I know. Ryan sat down heavily. I didn't know about the forgery. The statement surprised everyone, including Emily. She looked toward him sharply. I told you I was only gathering information. I believed you. He picked up the copied signature. I never saw this. You weren't supposed to. The words escaped before she could stop them. The instant they did, she covered her mouth. Too late. Ryan stared at her in disbelief. You hid this from me. She said nothing. You let me believe everything we were doing was legal. I thought if it worked, his voice cracked. You forged your mother's signature. I didn't file anything. You practiced. You prepared. You lied. Noah had remained silent throughout the entire conversation. Now he quietly pushed his chair back. Everyone turned toward him. He looked first at his father, then at his mother, finally at me. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I told Grandma. Emily froze. You? He nodded. I'm sorry. Her expression shifted from shock to heartbreak. You told her. I couldn't keep lying. She stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. His voice shook. But you kept asking me to keep secrets. Tears rolled down his face. You told me not to mention the papers. You told me not to talk about the bank. You told me Grandma wouldn't understand. He took a slow breath. I hated lying. The room fell completely silent. Children rarely deliver speeches. They simply tell the truth. And sometimes that truth carries more power than every legal document in existence. Emily buried her face in her hands. I never wanted Noah involved. He already was, I said softly. The moment you asked him to hide something from his grandmother. She began sobbing, real sobbing, not theatrical, not defensive. The sound of someone finally collapsing beneath the weight of months of deception. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the words I had been carrying inside me since Laura first showed me the debt records. If you had come to me, she slowly lifted her head. Before the lies, before the forgery, before the manipulation, I would have helped you. She stared at me in complete disbelief. What? I would have helped. Ryan looked equally stunned. You would? I nodded. Of course. Emily shook her head. No. I would have refinanced nothing. I would have signed nothing blindly. But I would have helped my daughter. Fresh tears streamed down her face. I thought. She couldn't finish. What did you think? I thought you'd say no. Did you ask? Silence. No. Did you give me the chance? Another silence. No. I folded my hands together. You made a decision for me. You decided I would choose money over family. I never made that choice. You made it on my behalf. Emily lowered her head once again. The entire dining room remained motionless. No one seemed interested in dessert anymore, or presents, or football. Christmas had become something entirely different. Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was calm, professional, compassionate. There is one thing everyone here should understand. We all looked toward him. The legal documents can be replaced. The financial losses can eventually be repaired. The business may recover. He paused. But trust, he looked directly at Emily, is rebuilt one honest decision at a time. No one argued. Because everyone at that table understood that his words were true. And although Emily had finally admitted far more than I ever expected, there was still one truth she didn't know. Months before Christmas, long before the first forged signature, long before the first bank visit, I had already made a decision that could have saved every one of them. She had simply never given me the opportunity to tell her. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. The silence no longer felt tense. It felt heavy. Like the moment after a storm passes when the wind has stopped, but broken branches still lie scattered across the yard. Emily sat motionless, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Ryan stared at the table as though every answer he had searched for during the past 2 years might somehow be written into its wood grain. Noah leaned back in his chair, exhausted by truths no 15-year-old should ever have been forced to carry. I looked around the dining room. Every face reflected a different emotion: shock, compassion, disappointment, relief. No one looked triumphant. Neither did I. There are moments in life when being right feels strangely similar to losing. This was one of them. I slowly stood and walked toward the china cabinet beside the fireplace. Inside the bottom drawer rested one final folder. Unlike the others, this one had never been copied. Only Daniel knew it existed. When I returned to the table, I placed it gently in front of Emily. She looked at it without touching it. "What is this? Open it." Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the cover. Inside was a letter bearing my signature and Daniel's. Attached behind it were several financial documents. Emily frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." She began reading aloud without realizing it. "In the event that Emily Carter experiences documented financial hardship," her voice stopped. She looked up at me. "What is this? A contingency plan? For what? For you?" Confusion spread across every face around the table. Even Ryan looked completely bewildered. I folded my hands together. About 6 months after Michael died, I glanced toward the family photograph resting on the mantel. I updated my estate plan. Emily stared at me. "I thought you never changed anything." "I changed quite a bit." Daniel quietly nodded. "I handled the revisions." I continued. "I had recently retired. I no longer needed as much investment income. My expenses had decreased. And I wanted part of your father's legacy to remain flexible." Emily slowly turned another page. The next document outlined a discretionary family assistance trust, a fund specifically created for emergency situations involving immediate family members. Its initial balance was $2 million. Helen gasped softly. Ryan looked at me in disbelief. "You?" I nodded. "It wasn't intended for vacations, or luxury purchases, or avoiding responsibility. It existed for genuine hardship." Emily's hands began shaking uncontrollably. "You created this months ago. For me, for my family." I smiled sadly. "For all of you." Noah looked from me to his mother without saying a word. I continued quietly. "The trust included one condition." Emily's eyes returned to the first page. "Requests must be made personally by the beneficiary with complete financial disclosure and honest explanation of circumstances." She stopped reading. Her shoulders began trembling. "I would have helped." The words were barely above a whisper. "I know." "No." She covered her mouth. "You would have." "Yes." Ryan looked completely stunned. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," Helen admitted. I looked around the room. Because it wasn't meant to impress anyone. It wasn't a gift. It was a safety net. I turned back toward Emily. "I created it because your father always believed families should never face disaster alone." Tears streamed freely down her face now. "I thought—" She couldn't finish. "What did you think?" I asked gently. "I thought if I admitted we were failing—" She lowered her head. "You'd see us differently." I smiled through tears of my own. "Emily, I buried my husband. I spent 40 years helping strangers survive inheritance battles. I watched families lose businesses, homes, marriages. You honestly believed financial failure would make me stop loving my daughter. She broke completely. The quiet sobs that escaped her were no longer defensive. They came from somewhere much deeper. I was ashamed. I know. I couldn't bear to disappoint you. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Do you know what disappointed me? She slowly looked up. Not the debt. Not the failed business. Not even the mistakes. I gently touched the forged signature lying nearby. It was this. She followed my gaze. The moment you decided deception was safer than honesty. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I understand. I hope you do. Ryan cleared his throat. His voice sounded raw. If we'd come to you, I finished the sentence for him. We would have sat exactly where we're sitting now. We would have reviewed every debt. Laura would have examined your business. Daniel would have protected everyone's legal interests. We would have made a plan. Ryan closed his eyes. Instead, you spent months trying to rescue yourselves by sacrificing trust. He nodded slowly. Yes. Noah finally spoke. His voice was small but steady. Can I ask something? Of course, I answered. He looked directly at me. Are you still going to help them? Every adult at the table turned toward me. The question belonged to a 15-year-old. The answer would shape every life in the room. I thought carefully before speaking. I will help. Emily looked stunned. But her expression changed immediately. Not the way you expected. She nodded silently. The trust still exists. I won't destroy it. I created it because I meant every word. I looked first at Ryan, then Emily. But from today forward, every dollar will be managed independently. Daniel understood immediately. I'll appoint an outside fiduciary. Exactly. Laura would oversee the financial review. Daniel would supervise legal compliance. Every payment would go directly toward verified debts. No cash, no shortcuts, no hidden accounts, no opportunities for further deception. Ryan nodded. That's fair. Emily whispered, I don't deserve it. I answered honestly. No. She flinched. Then I continued. But Noah deserves parents who have a chance to rebuild. She looked at her son. For the first time all afternoon, she truly saw him. I'm so sorry. Noah stood, walked around the table, and hugged his mother. She cried harder than before. I never wanted you carrying this. I know. I was scared. I know. I love you. I love you too. Ryan joined them a moment later. For several seconds, the three of them simply stood together. Not healed, not forgiven, but finally honest. I looked toward Michael's photograph on the mantel. His familiar smile stared back at me. He had always believed families were strongest when truth entered the room before pride. Today, truth had arrived very late. But it had arrived. Daniel quietly leaned toward me. You surprised me. I know. I expected consequences. There will be consequences. He raised an eyebrow. This isn't forgiveness without accountability. No. I looked toward Emily. Tomorrow, we begin repairing the damage. The legal protections remain. The trust amendments remain. The safeguards remain. Nothing changes there. Daniel smiled faintly. I thought so. Emily overheard him. You've already changed everything. I shook my head. No. I've simply made sure love and wisdom can exist in the same family. Outside snow continued falling softly beyond the dining room windows. Inside, Christmas dinner had ended very differently than anyone imagined. Emily had planned a toast celebrating what she believed would be my final Christmas in my home. Instead, she had discovered that months before her first lie, I had already prepared to become the person who would save her. If only she had trusted me enough to ask. Christmas evening ended far more quietly than it had begun. No one opened presents, no one suggested board games. The football game continued playing on the television in the living room, but not a single person watched it. Instead, people hugged one another longer than usual before leaving. Helen embraced me tightly at the front door. You did the hardest thing a mother can do. I don't know about that. You chose truth over comfort. I smiled faintly. I almost chose silence. She looked into my eyes. I'm glad you didn't. Richard shook my hand. I've known you for 30 years. I've never respected you more. I wasn't sure I deserved admiration. I certainly didn't feel victorious. By 7 o'clock, everyone had gone home. Everyone except Daniel. He remained behind to help me clear the dining table. We worked quietly for several minutes. Finally, he placed the last dessert plate into the dishwasher and turned toward me. How are you really doing? I looked around the empty dining room. Christmas ornaments reflected softly in the windows. Half-melted candles still flickered on the table. It hurts. I know. I kept hoping I'd misunderstood everything. You were hoping to be wrong. Yes. He nodded. Good people usually hope they're wrong. We sat in the living room for nearly an hour discussing practical matters. The emotional conversation had ended. The legal work had not. Daniel opened his notebook. We should review next steps. I'm ready. First, he adjusted his glasses. The attempted forgery. I already knew what he was going to ask. Are you pressing criminal charges? No. He didn't seem surprised. I thought you might say that. I won't pretend it never happened. But I won't destroy my daughter either. Daniel nodded slowly. That's your decision. It is. He closed that section of his notebook. The trust. The new protections remain exactly as they are. No changes. No exceptions. I agree. What about financial authority? I answered without hesitation. Emily will never again serve as trustee. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because it was difficult legally, because it represented something I had once imagined proudly passing to my only child. Now, I couldn't. Not yet. Daniel made another note. I'd like to appoint an independent corporate trustee. Do it. They'll oversee every distribution. They'll report annually. They'll require documentation. Perfect. There would be no opportunity for emotion to interfere with sound judgment, exactly as Michael would have wanted. Before Daniel left that night, he paused beside the front door. You know, what? You accomplished something today most families never do. I laughed softly. Ruined Christmas. He smiled. No. You stopped a tragedy before it became irreversible. After he left, I walked slowly through the quiet house. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to cry. Not because Emily had been caught, because somewhere along the way, my daughter had become so frightened that she believed deception offered more hope than honesty. No parent dreams of that ending. The following Monday began exactly as Daniel promised. Work, not celebration. Laura Mitchell joined us at Daniel's office. Stacks of financial records covered the conference table. Ryan arrived first. He looked as though he hadn't slept. Emily came 15 minutes later. She wore no makeup. Her eyes remained swollen from crying. She quietly took the chair across from me. No one mentioned Christmas. Daniel began immediately. This meeting has one purpose. He looked around the room. To determine whether financial recovery is possible. Laura opened her laptop. It is. Ryan stared at her. It is, yes. She projected several spreadsheets onto the conference room monitor. You owe a great deal of money. But not all debt is equal. She separated the obligations into categories: business equipment, commercial credit, tax obligations, personal loans. Several creditors were already willing to negotiate reduced settlements if immediate payment became available. Others simply wanted structured repayment. Ryan looked stunned. I thought everything was over. Laura shook her head. No. But you cannot continue making emotional decisions. She looked directly at both Ryan and Emily. From this point forward, every financial choice must be transparent. Emily nodded immediately. It will, Laura continued. The Family Assistance Trust can eliminate your highest interest obligations. But, she paused deliberately, only under independent supervision. Ryan looked toward me. I'll agree to whatever conditions you set, I answered quietly. These aren't my conditions. They're protections. For all of us. Emily finally spoke. I understand. Daniel slid another document across the table. This is your formal resignation. Emily looked confused. From what? As successor trustee? Silence. The words seemed to carry unexpected weight. She picked up the document, read every line carefully. I know why. I still. Her voice cracked. I still hoped. I reached across the table. This isn't forever. She looked at me. It's not. No. It's until trust earns its way back. She began crying again. Not dramatically, simply, quietly. I don't know how to do that. I smiled sadly. You've already started. How? You told the truth. For the first time in months. Daniel added, trust isn't rebuilt by promises. It's rebuilt through predictable behavior over time. Emily slowly nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. Laura spent the next several hours reorganizing every debt. Assets were sold, unnecessary subscriptions canceled, vacation memberships terminated, luxury vehicles replaced with modest ones. Ryan voluntarily liquidated expensive recreational equipment. Every difficult decision represented another step toward stability. Not one complaint escaped either of them. Late that afternoon, Noah arrived after school. He knocked softly before entering the conference room. I brought sandwiches. Everyone smiled. It was the first genuine smile of the day. He looked around nervously. Am I interrupting? No, I answered. You might actually be saving us. As everyone ate lunch together, something felt noticeably different. Nobody pretended everything was fine. Nobody forced cheerful conversation. Yet, no one lied either. For the first time in months, perhaps years, this family spoke honestly. Ryan admitted where he had failed. Emily acknowledged every poor decision. Laura explained financial realities without judgment. Daniel discussed legal consequences calmly. I simply listened. Sometimes healing begins not with forgiveness, but with honesty becoming ordinary again. By early evening, nearly every document had been signed. Independent trustees appointed. Payment schedules approved. Professional oversight established. The path ahead would be difficult, but it finally existed. As everyone prepared to leave, Emily lingered behind. She waited until Ryan and Noah walked toward the parking lot. Then she turned to me. Mom. Yes. I know you've forgiven enough to help. I remained silent. But, she swallowed. I don't expect you to trust me. I answered honestly. I don't. She nodded. I wouldn't either. For a long moment we simply stood there. Then she asked the question I had been expecting since Christmas Day. Will you ever? I thought carefully before answering. That depends. On what? Not on what you say. On what you consistently choose. She slowly nodded. I understand. As she walked towards the door, she suddenly stopped. I almost forgot. She reached into her purse. From inside, she removed a folded yellow sticky note. The original. Dinner toast. After dessert. Last Christmas. She handed it to me. I don't want reminders of who I became. I looked at the note one final time before folding it carefully. I do. She looked surprised. Why? Because forgetting our worst decisions makes repeating them much easier. She gave a sad smile. I never thought about it that way. I know. She kissed my cheek gently before leaving. I watched through the office window as she walked across the parking lot toward her family. Ryan opened the passenger door for her. Noah climbed into the back seat. They drove away together. Their future remained uncertain. Their finances would take years to repair. Their marriage would require patience. Their relationship with me would require even more. But they were finally traveling in the right direction. And after everything that had happened, that was more valuable than pretending nothing had ever gone wrong. 6 months passed before Emily asked to see me alone. Not because I avoided her, and not because she disappeared from my life. We saw each other regularly. Sunday dinners returned, though they were smaller now. Birthdays were celebrated. Noah's basketball season ended with his team reaching the regional semifinals, and I attended every home game. Ryan came by twice to help repair the fence after a spring storm. Life continued, but our conversations remained careful, polite, measured, like people learning to walk again after a serious injury. Trust doesn't return with an apology, it returns one ordinary day at a time. One Tuesday morning in late June, my phone rang. Mom? Emily's voice sounded different, steadier than it had since Christmas. Yes, sweetheart. Would you have lunch with me? Of course. Just us. I'd like that. She suggested a small cafe overlooking the James River, a place Michael and I had often visited after church when we were younger. I arrived a few minutes early. The waitress led me to a table beside the window. Outside, families walked along the river trail, while kayakers drifted slowly through the calm water. For the first time in many months, I felt no knot in my stomach waiting for Emily, only curiosity. She arrived carrying no purse, no folders, no paperwork, just herself. She hugged me gently. Thank you for coming. There was nowhere else I'd rather be. After ordering lunch, neither of us spoke for several minutes. We watched boats drift downstream. Finally, Emily folded her hands together. I didn't ask you here to talk about money. I know. How? You left your purse in the car. She laughed softly. I suppose you still notice everything. Occupational hazard. Her smile faded. I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened to me. I listened. I kept telling myself it was the debt. But that's not the whole truth. She looked out the window. I was terrified. Of losing the business. Partly. She shook her head. But mostly, of becoming a failure. I remained silent. My whole life, she continued slowly. I wanted you and Dad to be proud of me. You always made us proud. I know you think that. No, I know it. She smiled sadly. When Ryan's business started collapsing, I couldn't bear the idea of calling you. Why? Because I thought asking for help meant I'd failed. I reached for my glass of iced tea. It doesn't. I understand that now. I didn't then. She looked directly at me. I convinced myself that if I could solve everything before you found out, you'd never have to know how badly I'd messed up. I nodded slowly. And then one compromise led to another. Exactly. I justified every decision. I'm only gathering information. I'm only asking questions. I'm only preparing. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize I'd crossed the line until there wasn't one left. There was something profoundly different about this conversation. 6 months earlier, Emily had explained. Today, she reflected. Reflection changes people. I've replayed Christmas dinner 1,000 times. So have I. She laughed quietly. I believe that. I kept expecting you to scream. I considered it. You never even raised your voice. I didn't need to. She nodded. No. You'd already won. I gently corrected her. No. We'd already lost. She stared at me. I never wanted that day to become a competition. I wanted it to become a turning point. It did. Our lunches arrived. Neither of us touched the food immediately. Instead, Emily reached into her jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A small brass key. I recognized it instantly. The spare key to my house. She nodded. You gave it to me after Dad died. I remember. I've carried it every day since then. She pushed it toward me. I think you should have it back. I looked at the key for several seconds. What does this mean? It means I want to earn the privilege again. You don't trust yourself. I trust myself more than I did. But I also understand consequences. I slowly picked up the key. Its familiar weight rested comfortably in my palm. I appreciate this. She smiled weakly. I hoped you would. After lunch, we walked beside the river. The summer air felt warm but not oppressive. Children laughed near the playground. An older couple sat quietly on a bench feeding ducks. Life moved peacefully around us. Emily stopped walking. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever stop loving me? The question surprised me. I answered immediately. No. Not even after everything, especially then. She frowned. I don't understand. When people are at their worst, that's usually when they need love the most. She wiped away another tear. I didn't deserve it. Love isn't earned. Trust is. Those words settled between us. After another minute, she asked quietly, will you ever trust me again? I smiled. Do you remember learning to drive? She laughed through her tears. I hit Dad's mailbox. You certainly did. And he still let me drive again. He did. Why? Because one mistake didn't define your entire future. She looked hopeful. But, I continued, he also didn't hand you the keys the very next day. She laughed again. No. He made me practice in empty parking lots for weeks. Exactly. Trust works the same way, she nodded. I think I'm still in the parking lot. We both are. She reached for my hand. Thank you for not giving up on me. I came close. She looked startled. You did? I did. What stopped you? I thought about that carefully. Noah. She looked surprised. My son. He reminded me that broken families don't stay broken because people make mistakes. They stay broken because someone decides healing isn't worth trying. Emily covered her eyes for a moment. He saved me too. I know. That evening, she and Ryan invited me to dinner. Nothing elaborate, just grilled chicken vegetables and Noah's favorite mashed potatoes. Halfway through the meal, Noah suddenly stood. I have something. He disappeared upstairs and returned carrying a framed photograph. It showed our family 1 year earlier, the Christmas before everything fell apart. Michael's favorite angel ornament hung above the tree. Everyone smiled naturally. No forced expressions, no hidden fear. I found it while cleaning my room, Noah said. I thought... He hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't remember only the bad Christmas. Emily began crying immediately. Ryan placed an arm around her shoulders. I smiled. Your grandfather would have loved that idea. Noah handed me the frame. On the back, written in Michael's unmistakable handwriting, was something none of us remembered seeing before. Families aren't measured by the mistakes they survive. They're measured by what they choose afterward. No one spoke. None of us needed to. Michael had somehow managed to say exactly what all of us had spent the previous 6 months learning. When I drove home that night, the spare house key rested inside my purse. I hadn't returned it. Not yet. Someday, perhaps. But not yet. Because forgiveness had arrived. Trust was still quietly making its way home. A year passed more quickly than I expected. Time has a peculiar way of moving after a family crisis. The difficult days feel endless while you're living through them. Then one morning you realize an entire season has quietly slipped by. The maple tree outside my kitchen window had once again turned brilliant shades of red and gold. Another Thanksgiving came and went. Soon afterward, I carried the old wooden boxes of Christmas decorations down from the attic. For the first time since Michael died, I found myself humming while decorating the tree. Not because I missed him less, I never would, but because grief had finally made room for gratitude again. The little wooden angel Noah carved in elementary school still occupied the top branch, just as Michael always insisted. Some traditions deserve to survive every storm. Much had changed during the previous 12 months. Ryan sold the construction company, not because it failed completely, because he realized pride had kept him tied to a business that no longer served his family. He accepted a senior project management position with a respected engineering firm in Richmond. The salary wasn't as glamorous as owning a company, but it was steady, predictable, honest. He often joked that sleeping through the night without worrying about payroll felt richer than any business success he had ever experienced. Laura Mitchell's financial recovery plan worked better than anyone expected. By negotiating with creditors early and aggressively, nearly 40% of the commercial debt was settled for less than the original balances. The remaining obligations became manageable monthly payments. No miracle occurred. No hidden fortune appeared. Just discipline, consistency, humility. Emily found a new career as well. After leaving the marketing firm, where she had worked for years, she accepted a position with a nonprofit organization that provided financial counseling for families facing foreclosure and overwhelming debt. When she first told me, I smiled. Life has an interesting sense of humor. She laughed. I thought the same thing. Every day I meet people making the same mistakes I made. What do you tell them? The truth. She paused. That asking for help is always cheaper than hiding the problem. Noah entered his senior year of high school. He had grown taller than both of his parents. His basketball coach believed he had an excellent chance of earning a college scholarship. More importantly, the worried expression that had shadowed his face for so many months had finally disappeared. He laughed more easily. He teased his parents again. He looked like a teenager instead of a child carrying adult burdens. As for me, life settled into a peaceful rhythm. I continued volunteering twice a week at the legal aid office. Daniel occasionally invited me to speak with young attorneys about ethics and estate planning. Those presentations always ended the same way. I would tell them, the greatest danger to an estate isn't complicated tax law. It isn't investment risk. It isn't poor drafting. It's silence inside families. Every audience became quiet after that, because they knew it was true. When Christmas finally arrived again, I woke before sunrise. Snow had fallen overnight, almost exactly as it had the year before. For a brief moment, I stood by the front window, remembering the Christmas that had changed everything. Then I smiled. This year felt different, not because our family had become perfect, because we had finally become honest. At noon, cars slowly filled my driveway. Helen arrived first. Richard and Elaine followed. Margaret brought her famous pecan pie. Daniel came carrying sparkling cider once again. When Emily's SUV pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. She wasn't carrying gifts first. She was helping Noah carry 2 large serving dishes. Ryan followed behind them with folding chairs. They looked comfortable, not rehearsed, not anxious, simply present. Emily hugged me. "Merry Christmas, Mom." "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." There was no hidden meaning beneath the words. No second agenda. Only affection. During lunch, conversation flowed naturally. No one forced happiness. No one pretended the previous Christmas had never happened. At one point, Richard laughed and said, "Does anyone remember how tense we all were last year?" Everyone laughed. Even Emily. "I don't think I'll ever forget." Ryan smiled. "Neither will I." Noah looked around the table. "I hope we don't." Helen raised an eyebrow. "You hope we don't?" He nodded. "If we forget, we might stop appreciating this." The room became thoughtfully quiet. He was right. Difficult memories often become the foundation for better ones. After dessert, Emily stood. Immediately everyone laughed. She rolled her eyes. "I know. I'm standing again." Even I laughed. She picked up a glass of sparkling cider. "I promise this toast is much shorter." She looked around the room before finally turning toward me. "Last Christmas." Her voice caught for a moment. "I thought control could solve fear." I was wrong. She took a slow breath. "This year, I've learned something much more valuable." She looked directly into my eyes. "The strongest families aren't the ones without problems. They're the ones where someone is brave enough to tell the truth first." No one spoke. She continued. "Mom, I can never undo the hurt I caused. But I will spend the rest of my life proving that one terrible season doesn't have to define an entire family." She lowered her glass. "I'd like to make a different toast." Everyone slowly raised theirs. "To honesty. To second chances. And to Patricia." She smiled through tears. "Who showed me that love without wisdom can become enabling. But wisdom without love becomes something much colder." She laughed softly. "Thank you for giving us both." Glasses touched gently around the table. No applause followed. It wasn't needed. The moment belonged to all of us. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone beside the Christmas tree. The house felt comfortably quiet, not lonely, peaceful. I opened the small drawer beneath Michael's old writing desk. Inside rested the yellow sticky note. Dinner toast, after dessert, last Christmas. I had kept it exactly where Emily found it months earlier. Not as a reminder of betrayal, as a reminder of transformation. I folded it one final time, then placed it inside an envelope addressed simply, Lessons Worth Keeping. Beside it, I added another piece of paper. On it, I wrote something I wished every family understood. Love isn't proven by controlling the people we fear losing. It is proven by trusting them enough to tell the truth. I sealed the envelope, returned it to the drawer, turned off the living room lights, and before walking upstairs, I looked once more at the Christmas tree glowing softly in the darkness. Michael had been right all those years ago. Families are crooked, every single one of them. The lucky ones simply choose to straighten each other gently, instead of breaking apart. Sometimes the greatest danger to a family isn't money inheritance, or even betrayal. It's the silence that grows when fear replaces honesty. We often believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness, when in reality, hiding our struggles can lead us down a path we never imagined we would take. Pride has a way of convincing us that we must carry every burden alone, but the heaviest burdens become lighter the moment we trust someone enough to share them. This story is also a reminder that love and trust are not the same thing. Love can survive disappointment, heartbreak, and even betrayal. Trust, however, must be earned through honesty, consistency, and time. Forgiveness does not mean pretending the past never happened. It means choosing not to let yesterday's mistakes determine tomorrow's possibilities. Healthy boundaries are not signs of coldness. They are acts of wisdom that protect relationships while giving them the opportunity to heal. If you're a parent, never stop leaving the door open for your children to come home with the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. And if you're someone's son or daughter, remember that the people who love you most would rather hear an uncomfortable truth than a comforting lie. Most families don't fall apart because they face problems. They fall apart because those problems are hidden until they become impossible to ignore. In the end, the greatest inheritance we can leave our children isn't a house, a bank account, or a piece of property. It's the example of integrity, humility, and the courage to choose honesty over pride. Those are the gifts that continue to grow long after every material possession has faded away. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone you loved? Or has someone given you a second chance that changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many as I can, and your story may encourage someone who needs it today. And if you enjoy emotional family stories that remind us of the power of truth, forgiveness, and hope, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining us for the next story. Thank you for spending your time with me, and wherever you are in the world, I hope you and your family find peace, healing, and many more reasons to gather around the table